Hello, this is Dr. Mewborn, and this is Religion in the Public Square. We're looking at the Constitution of the United States, and we're on part 2 today, so it's good to be with you. Let's go ahead and jump into our study as we look at the three branches of government. Now, we've seen this slide before, but it's always good to do a review on this. There are three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. And the legislative branch makes laws, approves presidential appointments, 2 senators from each state. The number of congressmen is based on population. Executive branch signs laws, vetoes laws, pardons people, appoints federal judges elected every 4 years, and this is, of course, what we're talking about, the president. And then the judicial decides if laws are constitutional, are appointed by the president. There are over 9 justices can overturn rulings by other judges. And so this is how our government is broken down, and so we have a constitution that helps define these jobs and how everything works out. The Constitution has 7 articles, and here they are. And number 1 is the legislative branch. Number 2 is the executive branch. 3 is judicial branch. 4 is relations among people, or among states. I'm sorry. Number 5, the amendment process. Number 6, national debts, national supremacy, oaths of office. And number 7, requirements for ratification. We're going to hone in on the first article today, and the other ones will go a lot faster, but this one is a very important one as we're looking at the legislators, the laws, and how all that breaks down. This is a great picture of Washington, D.C. This is the Capitol building, and on top is the Statue of Freedom. And I've heard it said before, this statue is the highest statue in the land of D.C., Washington, D.C., because nothing is greater than freedom. Now, I don't know. I've heard that a lot. I've been to D.C. so many times, probably a dozen times, and been on so many tours and just love it there. But this is just a wonderful, wonderful, amazing place to visit if you get the opportunity to. This is how our government officials and our servants, I guess you would say, how it's laid out. What is kind of a look at the federal terms and requirements. Representative has 2-year term, minimum age 25, residency from the state which they are, and the citizenship has to be a citizen for 7 years. Senator, 6-year term, well, minimum age has to be 30, and the residency state in which elected, and then citizenship 9 years, and then president is 4-year terms, minimum age 35, residency 14 years in the U.S., and then citizenship natural born. If you remember, one of the great controversies and one of the great issues that kept popping up all the time was about President Barack Obama, whether or not he was a natural born citizen. And so that became a huge issue called the birther issue and all those types of things. And so the reason being is to be the president of the United States, you have to be born in America, and that's why people are bringing up all that kind of stuff. And then the Supreme Court justice, unlimited in term, minimum age none, residency none, and then citizenship none as well. All right, and so this is kind of how these offices and these terms and requirements are broken down. As we get into Article 1, which is known as the legislative branch, we're looking at the principal mission of the legislative body is to make laws, and that's what they do. That's why those people are meeting on Capitol Hill. That's why those people are meeting in the Capitol building. They're there to make laws, and that's their point. Remember, the judicial branch is to define those laws, but what they do, legislative branches definitely make them. There's 2 different chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. Congress is a legislative body that holds the power to draft and pass legislation, borrow money for the nation, declare war, and raise a military. It also has the power to check and balance the other 2 federal branches. And so as we look at this, there are sections. There are 10 sections to Article 1, and we're going to go through those, and then when we go through the rest of the articles, it'll go a lot faster. But let's go ahead and get into Section 1. Section 1 is known as the vesting clause. The clause gives Congress of the government's power to make laws. There are similar vesting clauses in Article 2 and Article 3, which give powers to the other branches of the government. No other branch is allowed to exercise the same power. So each of these branches have unique powers, and that was put in place for checks and balances. But it's used for the people, to protect the people and make sure that no one is running rogue. I like what Woodrow Wilson said. He said, the Constitution was not made to fit us like a straitjacket. In its elasticity, lies its chief greatness. What he's saying there is that the rules are so good for a government or for states or for a country, because what it does is it allows freedom for you to live in this country and to exercise your freedom. So without rules, you will not have the freedoms of this country. It's kind of like the rules of baseball. And I think I've used this illustration before. The rules of baseball are very important so that you can have the freedom to play baseball. If there's no rules in the game of baseball, then you can't really play the game. It's not even a game anymore. It's just everybody doing whatever they want to do. And nobody should be doing that, because it actually destroys a nation. The Bible talks about this. Everyone's wanted to do what they saw fit in their own eyes in the book of Judges, and it just destroyed nations left and right. And so Woodrow Wilson had it right here in defining the elasticity of the Constitution, which we can change it for the betterment of the people. All right. In Section 2 outlines the United States House of Representatives, states that there will be elections for members of the House of Representatives every second year. And we talk about midterm elections and things like that. That's where you get that from. These representatives are voted in by the people, meaning the citizens of each state will choose the representatives. Any representative who decides to run for a seat on the House of Representatives must be at least 25 years old and must have been an American citizen for at least 7 years. And we looked at that already. He or she must also live in the state that he or she wishes to be a representative. Section 3. Section 3 describes and explains the process of the Senate. There will be 2 senators for each state, and they will have 6-year terms. And that's why you have 100 senators when you're looking at the United States government. Senators must be at least 30 years old and must have been an American citizen for 9 years. He or she must live in the state that he or she wishes to be a representative of. And then we have something here, and I wanted to show you this, talking about the U.S. Senate Great Seal. Just this picture of the eagle and just how amazing this picture is. But if you look really closely at this slide, you're going to see this word. It's e pluribus unum, which is actually just the phrase means out of many, one. And it's talking about this great nation that we have that was started as made up of 13 colonies, became 13 states, which grew over time, and now we're looking at 50 states. And just an amazing, amazing thing to think of who we are as a great nation. Out of many, we have the one. And so it's just a powerful thought. Section 4. Section 4 explains that the states have the power to determine where, when, how elections will be held for senators and representatives. The section also states that Congress must meet at least once each year, and this meeting must be only the first Monday in December. Section 5 talks about how procedure should be for each House of Congress. It includes the qualifications of members, the rules they must follow, how to keep records for what happens, and how a House can adjourn. And so you got to have all these rules into place. Section 6 describes the privileges, restrictions, and compensation of senators or representatives. These civil officers get paid by the Treasury of the United States. They cannot be arrested unless it is for felony, treason, or breach of peace. They also cannot take an office in the executive government while they are still in Congress. You see, this section here really protects people that are in government. And sometimes it's a really good thing, but sometimes it can be a really bad thing, especially if you get people in office that are crooked and they find ways to come around treason, or they come around ways of having felonies or things like that. They can be in there and they can cause a lot of problems. And that's why people a lot of times say politicians are crooked, because they're very protected. Their salaries are protected, things like that. And this is one of the sections that for a good, honest, loyal person of integrity, it's a really good thing. But when there's people in there that are just doing things for money, or they're doing things for power, prestige, whatever it is, it kind of causes a huge rift and kind of tremors throughout our government. Article 1, Section 7 Section 7 explains how Congress can create acts through bills. A bill can start in either the House of Representatives or in the Senate. Once the bill is passed in both houses, it can become a law. After it is passed, it will go to the president, who can let it pass or choose to veto the bill. And so we have this picture here. A bill may be introduced in either the Senate or the House of Representatives, and so a bill is created, and it's kind of like this powerful document that has been brought forth by the Senate or the House of Representatives. Then it's taken after it's been in one section, then it's taken to another, and then the other house, and then it can be once they've both agreed on it, then it'll be taken to the president's, okay, or the president, and then it'll be either checked or it'll be vetoed, that type of thing. And so that's what they're explaining there. Section 8 of Article 1, Section 8 gives the enumerated powers of Congress. The enumerated powers are a list of items that Congress is specifically allowed to do. All right. Powers include making money or setting up taxes. And so you have a picture of some money right there. And one of the biggest issues that we've dealt with in the States and in America was making money. That's been a problem from the beginning. When you make a lot of money, and money is just distributed out in America, and there's just an abundance of it. Well, then there's no real demand for it because there's so much of it, and it lessens the value of the dollar bill. That happened at the beginning of our nation, but it has also happened in the last 12 years. They're just making money, and the more that you have of something, the less valuable it really is. I've got a bunch of baseball cards. I used to collect baseball cards when I was probably 10 years old, 11 years old, and so that was several years ago now. Well, the interesting thing about that is that there are so many baseball cards in the world. I've looked at how much those baseball cards are worth in the last year, and they're not worth anything. And the reason they're not worth anything because there's an abundance of them. Well, the same thing for dollar bills. If you have an abundance of them, an abundance of money just in the states, then they lessen in value. And it's the whole idea of supply and demand. It's also seen with money. Sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense because we need just money to buy things. But really, it's the whole idea. Dollar bills are just like supply and demand, just the same way. And so this is a very important thing to look at when looking at kind of the limits of government and what they're allowed to do. Section 9 kind of talks about this as well. Section 9 is a list of limits on the powers of Congress. For example, Congress cannot create any titles for royalty like a king. So they're not allowed to do that. There's a limit. That's kind of what this picture is showing. They're in prison a little bit. They're limited to what they can do in certain areas, which rightly so, because if they could just do whatever they wanted to, it's just going to cause tremendous strife in the United States. And a lot of times what they're going to do, especially if they're crooked, do things for themselves, which is very, very wrong and very evil. I love looking at maps like this. This is our electoral votes and the power of the states. And if you know our voting process, we don't vote by population. It's not by how many people are in America. We've seen that just in this last election with President Trump and Secretary Clinton. Hillary Clinton had more in the popular vote than Donald Trump had, but Donald Trump won the states. And what that means is that you can have more population in a state, but that doesn't mean you have more electoral votes in that state. And so there's a very big difference between electoral votes and popular vote. And so this is kind of how the states are broken down. And actually, this is just one of those slides that kind of shows you a lot of the red would be more of the Republican, what we see, of course, with Trump, and then the blue is more of Clinton and what we see there. And so, but if you look over, I'm going to show you something kind of fascinating. If you look over on the West Coast, you've got 55 electoral votes for one state, and that's California. California is very, what we would say, a liberal state. They have said they don't even want, a lot of their leaders say they don't even want any part of the United States of America because they are so liberal. They think in a different way. They believe that they're right in their thinking. So it's kind kind of an odd thing, right? So this is kind of how it's broken down. And there's 435 representatives, 100 senators. And so there's really 538. There's 538 electoral votes because DC has three. So that's how all of that's broken down. The last section, this is the last section of Article 1, limits the power of the states, meaning they only have so much power. They do have power in their electoral votes, how many they can get for the president. So, but they're limited in that as well. Just because you have a bunch of people voting in a state does not mean that that state is going to win the presidency. There's a lot more people in this country that can vote. The first part of the section says the states do not have certain powers that the federal government has, and so that's a big deal. States cannot just overrun the federal government, and that's kind of outlined in Section 10 of Article 1. And it cannot create money, and so talking about the states and what they're able to do and the feds, what they're able to do. And so you kind of see this limited power in government. And I think this is kind of a good way to put it. It's putting locking and key and chains over the things that really do make laws, and that's computers. That's people working with computers and signing things into law in that type of way. And so the whole point of the Constitution is to really keep us united. And that's what we're seeing here. United we stand, right? All right, well, that has been Religion in the Public Square, Constitution of the United States, Part 2. Continue to study the Constitution. Get to know it well enough. It's going to be on your midterm exam, and I'm going to ask you to outline, of course, the 7 articles, the preamble, things like that, and helping explain what those things are. And so we'll be looking forward to doing a little bit of review here in the near future, but continue on in your reading and your studies. All right, good to be with you today. God bless you and have a great rest of the day.